Welcome to everyone just joining the webinar. We'll get started here in just a moment. Just waiting for some people to sign in. So just hold tight for a minute here or so. All right, so everybody seems to be signing in, so I'll go ahead and get started. Good morning and welcome everyone to the 5th installment of California Wine Institute's Behind the Wines with our host, Elaine Chukan Brown. Thank you all for taking the time out to be with us today. So due to the very positive reception of last month's episodes, we've decided to continue the series. This month, host Elaine Chukan Brown, wine writer and educator, will focus the conversations with top California producers on questions of discovery, legacy, and innovation. We will dive into how their own winemaking has changed in response to working with new regions or new varieties, and how the work of other producers, both past and present, has inspired them to challenge norms. So today we welcome Hardy Wallace, owner and winemaker at Dirty and Rowdy Family Winery. So first, some housekeeping reminders for everyone. First, please ensure you have your Zoom screen set to speaker view. There should be an option to select it in the top right corner of your screen. During the webinar, know that there are 2 communication methods available to participants that we encourage you to use. We have a chat section as well as a Q&A section. So these are different. The chat section is an informal way for you to communicate with other participants. Just be sure to select everyone in the to field, as it can default to panelists only. And then there's the Q&A section, and this is where we'd like you to submit your questions for Elaine and Hardy to answer towards the end of the webinar. So we will do our best to address your questions live, but please know that if there's anything that's not answered will be provided in the Q&A summary in the email you will receive following the program. And this email will also provide a list of export markets for the wineries represented. So now I'll turn it over to our host, Elaine. She writes for her own website, Waka Waka Wine Reviews, for JancysRobinson.com as the American specialist, and contributes to a long list of respected publications. And Hardy. Hardy has played an important role in redefining California wine over the last 10 years, helping to reinvigorate small winery marketing while focusing on lesser known varieties and leveraging ancient and new winemaking methods. So Elaine, take it away.
Hardy, I'm so happy and excited that you're here joining us today. Let's see, we got to get the screen going right here. I want you to know I put on my tie-dye just to help you feel more at home. It's great. I love it. Great to see you. Same here. So one of the things I want to actually get us started with, it's exciting. You have 10 full vintages under your belt now for your own Dirty and Rowdy label, and more than that for winemaking experience here in California. But one of the things I think it's really important to remember is how different California wine and the perception of it and what was going on actually was just 10 years ago. So I was hoping you could kind of get us started talking about that a little bit, just how things were when you got started.
Yeah, absolutely. First, thanks very much for having me here. This is an honor, and it's great to be with everyone here online from all around the world. But yeah, the California wine map 10 years ago was a completely different world. We were coming out of really one period of time where things were bigger, and we were still in that world of powerful, extracted, intense, which is something California can do really well. But it seemed like we were really getting a narrowing of focus into just a couple of grape varieties. So whether it be Cab Sauv, the Bordeaux varieties, Chard, and really kind of we're at peak range of kind of the explosion of like Pinot Noir popularity. And what was getting often overlooked were less known varieties, and I think techniques that would be able to make wines that were still fresh, light, but still powerful and intense. So I think the whole landscape was totally different, and that if you moved off that landscape, if you moved to do something that was a lesser known variety, you did that if it was something like, here's our wine club wine, or here's one of our little like eccentricities, or I can't even pronounce it today. Here's one of our little offshoot wines here. But it's never what anyone would focus on, because you can't build a business on something that wouldn't sell in the market. Yeah. So it was a totally different world. And that actually, I think, was perfect for folks like Dirty and Rowdy and a number of others to come in and actually find incredible plantings of lesser known varieties and really take a totally different magnifying glass onto California terroir.
Right. I mean, one of the things that, we talk about New California quite a lot now, and people pretty readily understand that there's this notion of like a new wave style in the state. But the truth is, Benet's book didn't come out, New California Wine didn't come out for several years after you got started. And just that conversation opening up to help people recognize that was going on wasn't here yet. And I was lucky enough to, Alice Firing and I were the first two people to write about you. I got to taste with you for the first time before you even had labels. We got to meet, to taste on your porch. And it was like, I was so excited because there's Shiner bottles with handwritten notes about, what's in each of them. And the thing was, like, that first tasting of Dirty and Rowdy, barely anybody had seen it. And the truth is, like, that visit with you and with a number of other people, as you said, that's part of why I moved to California. That's, because I came here and there were these stalwart producers, these classics. And then there was clearly something else also emerging. And I thought, my God, if I move here now, I'll get to see it happen, Yeah. And so with California as it is now, I feel like it has the biggest range of potential styles to offer that it's ever had in the whole history of the state, which is pretty exciting. But one of the things that's interesting about what you're doing is you went full in with Mourvèdre, and the variety, of course, arrived in the 1800s, and other people had made 100% Mourvèdre before, but you really went full in commitment, single vineyard. But in a way that's different from the producers we've been talking to previously. The first four people we spoke to, they're very, not purely estate driven, but they're focusing on they're farming and then making wine. And you're doing something very different. You're actually intentionally seeking fruit from different vineyards all over the state. Talk to us about that process.
Yeah, I think that for me, if we look at, first of all, the choice of Mourvèdre, that was something where we thought both, once we started working with it, it fit California so well. It does really well in arid environments, thick-skinned. We can get a lot of hang time. Even though it's medium acidity, if we put it up at elevation, we can preserve acidity, we can preserve freshness. And for us, if we took something that we truly thought could soak up that, both the soil, but also endure the sun and endure the California kind of Mediterranean climate that we have in most wine growing regions, it made total sense. And the way we started making it, which was this lighter extraction process than really had previously been done before, the way we were making that, I felt like we were able to get in the glass or in the bottle, we were able to get to display that soil much quicker and much faster than we were doing it in a more traditional or typical way.
Right. Well, so one of the things that's unique about what you're doing is each of your Mourvèdre wines and every one you've ever made is 100% whole cluster.
That's correct.
And some of that, what I think is one of the interesting tidbits to point out here is that some of that actually related to just logistical demand from when you got started.
Absolutely. I think, we've been 100% whole cluster with Mourvèdre since day one. And it really, at first, I love 100% whole cluster wines. I think they bring an extra element of dimension to that wine. And I like the idea of keeping something whole. So making sure that what we bring from the vineyard and what we're bringing in is actually used in the fermentation process. But the logistic part of it was incredibly real when we got started, because my first few vintages I made while working for other people, and especially vintage one, where we're making and doing all the winemaking decisions at 1 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock in the morning, with just a ton and a half of fruit. So to set up the destemmer would take an hour. To run the destemmer would take 15 minutes. To clean the destemmer would probably take 2 hours and change.
Well, so this is after a whole day of doing somebody else's winemaking too, right?
Exactly.
Yeah,
so the idea of doing 100% whole cluster sounded awesome. It was not only did we want to do it, but you're like, man, let's check that off the box. Like we're not setting up the destemmer for nothing. So
it's but it's also, I mean, I know that over time you've come to see whole cluster as integral in part of your ability to preserve that freshness in the wines. And talk to us a little bit about how just it changes the dynamics in the tank and helps capture things more readily for you, like reducing extraction and keeping freshness and things like that.
Yeah, so when we throw everything in whole cluster, so we're not like crushing anything beforehand. So I'm not stomping on the grapes. I'm not breaking everything up before that goes into the tank. So we're dropping in our clusters 100% whole berry into the tanks, into open top tanks. I do a little bit of pigeage to get some foot treading to get a little bit of juice going in the tank. But then at that point, basically, you may have a little bit of crushed juice at the top of the tank or a little crushed fruit at the bottom of the tank. But what kind of stays in between is really a partial carbonic whole berry fermentation that's happening. So we've got this kind of combination of traditional maceration and fermentation, but that whole berry core, which I think can lend to some of that lift that those wines get and some of that expression, but also still gives us some of that traditional extraction. So it's kind of a best, to me, at least for our style, it's a best of both worlds where we can keep a fermentation, has a lot of space in it. We can keep our temperatures a little bit lower. By being whole cluster and open top, we blow off a little bit more alcohol so the wines can stay a little bit fresher. Mm-hmm. And it just seemed to be a technique that fit both, I think, in the style of wines that we enjoy, but still kept that we could still really get back to like the sites that are behind us, that it wasn't just a pure like, hey, carbonic, fruity explosion. It really still stayed soil driven.
Well, and the one of the things too is your choice to go all in with 100% whole cluster Mourvedre. It's actually drawn sommeliers from other parts of the world to you to investigate, but also other producers from around the world too. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I think it's been an interesting thing because, I mean, this whole idea of stems, like people get really caught up on it for right or wrong, especially when we talk about, I mean, it really, the discussion on stems really focuses on Pinot Noir. And you've got the camp of, 100% whole cluster to always destemmed, and the notion of greenness and things like that, that I never gave that, ripe stems. I never gave any of that a thought when it came to Mourvedre. It was something that I think the way that it works in Mourvedre is very different than in Pinot Noir, probably being a thicker skin variety, having higher pH.
But also later harvest too.
Much later harvest, especially in California. Mm-hmm. And so I think that idea in doing that with Mourvedre really started to scratch people's heads and think like, oh, you're taking, it kind of defied logic in a way where you're taking one of the more tannic red grape varieties and then you're potentially making it more tannic by stem inclusion. But in a way, we were actually making the wines fresher and brighter, at least in the style that we were doing it with. So I think that it started attracting a lot of other producers, both folks from California, folks from the Southern Hemisphere, and even folks from Spain, where we've had plenty of folks come and visit us that have made traditional Monastrell or have made traditional Mourvedre, and then start asking us about the kind of the process that we go through to still work with these sites that have incredible power and intensity, but also can display that incredible freshness.
Yeah. Well, and I know, I mean, one of the things we've talked about, not to geek too hard, but it's so hard to do mechanical extraction with a fully whole cluster tank that it actually reduces the tannin extraction when the tank is fully whole cluster versus if it's like half.
Yeah, I think it is something where unless you want to get like totally aggro and insane and just start like destroying everything in the tank, to be able to do fully punch down Mourvedre, 100% whole cluster that's gone in whole berry. I mean, it's really hard. It's and it's harder, more so than Pinot Noir again, because the skins are that much thicker.
Right.
So it's like you need a jackhammer if you're really going to try to break everything up.
Well, let's go ahead and like start talking about the Familiar, the first wine that we're looking at. But one of the reasons I want to talk about it too is let's go ahead and this wine is actually a blend of almost every Mourvedre site that you work with. So Katie, could we go ahead and pull up the map? So one of the things I want to point out here is, so this is basically the center of California. So we're at the top there, you see Mendocino County, and this is going all the way down the coast, all the way through below Monterey County. And Hardy, you're actually working with vineyards basically, you know, all the way from Mendocino down well into the Central Coast, and then also all the way over to the foothills. And you have previously worked with vineyards even further south. And so, but one of the things that's important to note about you is that you're not just sourcing fruit, you're actually regularly checking in with the vineyards and helping to direct the farming. And so through the lens of Mourvedre, you actually have this opportunity to get to know the state in a totally unique way. So could you talk to us about how some of the variation that you see in these different vineyards that are all going into the Familiar?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, first of all, to think of this range for those that are outside the US, we're almost at Humboldt County, all the way down to almost Los Angeles. That is a 8.5 hour drive. So think it would almost be like making wine in Spain and Greece at the same time. I mean, it is such a huge stretch of land. And so we're able here, because of this, we're able to see not just different terroirs, but really almost climatically completely different places. And we're able to see things, you know, we have stuff that's up to 1,000 meters and stuff that's down at, 10 meters. And I think to be able to have this level of exploration, really, if we think about it, let's think about it like music. If Mourvedre itself is simply just the instrument and the soil itself is the music or the score, we're able to see California, almost the incredible like symphony and beauty of California through this one instrument in all these radical different spots. And it also helps as a small producer, it helps where we're not just dialed into like if the foothills have a tough vintage, well, maybe Chalone VA is having like a banner vintage, or maybe parts of Mendocino, or maybe Contra Costa. So it allows us, especially with a wine like the Familiar that is a blend of almost all of our sites, it allows us really to create something that is kind of California Mourvedre in one vintage, in one bottle. It really shows that incredible range. I think that is the part that gets us excited about Mourvedre in California.
But as you've gotten to know these different sites, it's kind of changed some of your views of what you need to do in working with the variety from different places. Could you speak to that a little bit as well?
Yeah, I think when we first started, like everything, you start with your idea of what you want because you don't know the sites as well. You kind of, until you get that relationship and get that history, it's kind of like, oh, I like lighter, brighter, fresh Mourvedre. And you kind of find a site that's 100-year-old, dry farmed, planted on limestone and granite, and you try to do that, not necessarily going to take you in that direction. Yeah. So you've got to really learn, to me, with that experience over years in each one of these spots, that there is what we want and there's what the site wants to give us. And it's always, we can always guide something as gently as possible, but really we've got to listen to the vineyard first, and we can try to give our interpretation of that. But yeah, like a site like Rosewood Vineyard in Mendocino and a site like Enns Vineyard in San Benito County, which are about 4.5 hours away, both of those vineyards between 75 and 100 years old, you cannot approach them the same way. Enns will always hit you with the mule kick, and then Rosewood is this just sappy, light, like almost drinks like Trousseau in a way with a little bit more concentration.
Well, can you tell us a little bit too about the differences of those sites? Like how, what is it behind the sites that's making those differences that you see in the cellar?
Yeah, I think the first thing is the geology of the site. So we have, and that's the thing that we've always focused on, is having radically different soil types. So whether it is, clay loam that's up in Mendocino, whether it's limestone and granite that's at Enns Vineyard, whether it's pure sand at Evangelo, or volcanic and loam and granite up in the Sierra foothills, that drives everything first. And then beyond that, the bigger thing too is that we work in a lot of hot climates, and we're constantly seeing our vines shut down. So like a spot like Shake Ridge, which we'll talk about in a little bit, I mean, we're hot at 7 o'clock in the morning to basically 7 o'clock at night. And we have multiple periods, throughout the season that those vines are totally shutting down. So we're able to get these really, if you think about it like cooking, like searing the perfect, steak, you're able to like get these like really crispy, ripe flavors on the outside, but you cut it open and it's like beautifully rare
Right.
on the inside. Shake Ridge can do that. Enns can't. Evangelo doesn't do that. So it's really finding, first of all, the soil that's driving it, but then also the climate on top of it and how Mourvedre reacts.
So I think we should just very briefly clarify what we mean by the vine shutting down, just in case anybody's unclear about that too.
Yeah, so once we get above, basically the high 90s, mid 90s inside the canopy, the vines are going to stop photosynthesis. So basically they're going to shut down for a period of time during the day and they'll start coming back up. So think of it like you're almost blasting things with heat and ripeness. It's kind of, here's your ripening, then it stops. Here's your ripening, then it stops. So it's kind of a start, stop versus that very steady
right.
Ripening all throughout the day.
Well, and it often is not just photosynthesis that stops. So in other words, sugar development's not increasing, but the at that point, respiration also generally stops so that it's also not losing acid. So it really is like this almost stasis period for a vine.
Yeah. And that's the thing that I really love, especially about stuff in the foothills or stuff at elevation, because Mourvedre, again, is not a super high acid red grape variety. But what we've been able to do at these spots that do shut down, we're able to get those beautiful ripe flavors, and then we're able to preserve acidity based on this, these vines shutting down and also being up at elevation in these super cool nights. The second part, though, with that is really that I think with having this spot at elevation, we can really, because Mourvedre pushes out later than most grape varieties, so it buds out later, we have much less of a risk of frost and frost damage. I mean, we always have risk, but if we had something that was an earlier budding, or earlier variety.
Like Chardonnay or Pinot would be examples.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So Mourvedre, we can actually skirt some of the challenges earlier in the season, and we can let things hang much longer, again, preserving that natural acidity.
One of the things that's great about Mourvedre is it changes where you can plant, because like you said, you can go into places that might have high frost risk in the spring, but then you need it to be a place that stays warmer longer because Mourvedre harvests later. But then that also, in a place that has that heat, the Mourvedre's coming in later in the season when things have cooled down and the light levels have changed too. So it actually is coming in at a time that helps preserve that freshness as well, because it's a dynamic variety in that way.
Without a doubt. Yeah.
Let's go ahead and look at the Shake Ridge wine too, and focus in on that map. So we're moving now straight into the foothills, and this is, I love that Katie was able to capture this map. So that yellow line is the Amador County boundary. So that is actually Amador County. We're looking at it from a little bit of an angle, obviously. But you'll see on the western side of Amador County, there's Shake Ridge Ranch Vineyard. It's relatively close to, that's the Nevada line there on the upper right. But notice too that Shake Ridge essentially is on the western slope of the Sierra foothills. And you can see in this map, there's like textures. You can see the kind of folding bands of the mountains. Shake Ridge is on that western face, but kind of tucked into a little bit of a protected area and at high elevation. You want to tell us a little bit more about that, about the site, the soil conditions and the weather there?
Yeah, absolutely. So with Shake, for those that aren't that familiar with California geography, basically I live in Napa and that's where I'm at right now. It's about 2.5 to 2 3/4 hours due east of here for the most part, and starting to climb up into the mountains, into really like ski country in the high Sierra. So Shake sits right around 600 and change meters. And at that point, the soils are radically different block to block. So this is a block of Shake Ridge that I get here that's a little bit more volcanic with some chunks of granite and quartz in there. And then I can switch over at some point, I'll show you in a bit, another one that's far more granitic. But really there's this kind of volcanic and loamy base that really is kind of the core of Shake Ridge. And I think it's part of the warmth that we get in the wines that comes there. And it also kind of is part of that softness and the tannins we get. But it is a hot spot. It is a kind of a wonderful spot right where we kind of get into the kind of like pine forest type world as we're kind of hitting, we're the foothills, but we're just getting into really the Sierra here.
Right. Right, not quite as high elevation as when you push a little further east. But one of the things too about that area, it's so I almost think of Shake Ridge as like a vine village. There's so much texture and rolling through the site, and so you get all these different aspects. But then Anne has also really used that to her advantage to come up with different planting styles and different varieties across the site too. And you were kind enough to send us a video to give people a better sense of the area. Katie, could we go ahead and show that? So you can see here that changing forest that Hardy was talking about. But now notice here too, these are multiple blocks, and you can see they're planted in different ways and to different varieties, but all surrounded by forest. And really textured rolling landscape here. And farmed by a total legend. Tell us about Anne a little bit.
Oh my gosh, Anne Kramer. And I think the one thing that we have to always credit is that everything we do starts, I mean, obviously it starts at the site, but that site, the people that translate that site into basically into what it is are the farmers. And Anne has been a viticultural legend in California for 3 decades. And from doing consulting work for some unbelievably super known wineries, well-known wineries, and then doing her own project at Shake Ridge. We work with a lot of great farmers, and I don't know a single person that puts the amount of care and touch that Anne does. It's like 2019 for us was, it was a year you had to farm 18 you could walk away and come back at the end of the season and you can make great wine. 19 you had to do some work, and Anne just was constantly doing all the work that required to make something like stunning and beautiful. So I just think as far as a steward of land and someone that gets the winemakers that she works with, because she does work with an incredibly varied range of winemakers. It can be folks like us on one side, then you've got kind of a transition to folks that make a different style of wine that, from like superstars like Andy Erickson and Helen Keplinger. And then you've got on a different spectrum, you've got, us, you've got Steve coming up, you've got Jolie Led, and all of us, I think, Anne can just dial into kind of what our wants and needs are, that we still all show that site beautifully, but in kind of a different, just kind of a different lens. It takes a really good farmer to be able to work different styles like that.
Well, it really just speaks so strongly to the relationship that a winemaker like you has to have to the site, but specifically to the farmer that is going to listen to, these are your needs and interests in terms of the wine you're making, and then really adjust that farming to match what those needs are for you.
I mean, we share one block. I've got 3 blocks of Mourvedre at Shake Ridge, and we share one block with another producer. And if you look at their blocks and our blocks, or their rows and our rows, they're so different. And we both are able to make the exact wine that we want. And that's the part that to have a grower work like that with you, and again, dial into your kind of into your expression. It's awesome. And it takes a lot of work and a lot of money for them to do that.
Well, and so tell us just briefly, what kind of role does Shake Ridge, Shake Ridge is actually now the site you've been working with the longest, and you started working with it in 2011 and have worked with it since. But tell us briefly just what role does it end up playing in a wine like Familiar?
It depends on the vintage. So in 2019, it's probably about 35% of this wine. So about the Familiar is about 35% Shake, about 30%, right around there, Antle or Rodnick Farm, probably 25%, ends, and then the mixture of everything else. But shake can be, because it is one of the vineyards we get the most amount of fruits from, it can be one of the parts that's a big chunk of familiar in any given vintage. And that's, as we drink the familiar, the 19, I really feel that almost kind of that warmth that we get from the volcanic soils. Wine is only 12.7 alcohol, but it does have this incredibly, like almost like warming, like ripe feeling.
Well, and that's consistent with volcanic soils, like you're saying, yeah. But then, of course, your current release for Familiar is the 19, but with a single vineyard Shake Ridge, you're kind of showing the more serious side, and it's an 18 that you're drinking for that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So for us, with all the Familiar every year, the Familiar is kind of our early drinking Mourvèdre. It's something that we want to be able to showcase the beauty and the freshness of kind of California Mourvèdre, but in a way that is approachable and expressive early. So I always think like the Familiars are not, the 13, which was our first vintage of that wine, still tastes great. But I think we try to give that wine and let it show everything it can early in its life, that if you cellar it, I think the returns may not be quite there. Like it may still be delicious and drinkable, but is it worth sticking in the cellar for 5 or 10 years? Probably not. Where on the vineyard designates, what we do, like the Shake Ridge, and it is purely a barrel selection of what we think are the most structured, the most intense, the most graceful and kind of terroir-driven barrels. So maybe I make 12 barrels of Shake Ridge every year, but we bottle 3 or 4 for the 18. And I want to pick out those that I think are truly the most compelling, and that also have that ability to be delicious early and have a life in the cellar.
Right. So I asked you to pick a wine from another producer, and we were lucky enough to do that with a wine that also comes from Shake Ridge. But why don't you go ahead and tell us what the third wine we're going to look at today is?
This was the no-brainer for me.
Yeah.
You asked if there was something else I could bring in, and my immediate thought was it has to be a wine from Steve Edmunds, and it has to be, if it can be, a wine from Shake Ridge that Steve makes. And I think for a lot of reasons. One, in general, I love Steve's wine, but even more so, people like us that have been able to make this transition kind of 10 years ago and help create a different vision of California wine, we can only do what we did because people like Steve did what he did 20 years, 25 years before we even started. Yeah. So I think for me, it is not only a tribute to a wine that I love, but it's making sure that, I don't exist unless Steve Edmunds did what Steve did. So in so many ways, and it's just an honor to be able to drink this one, because this is the one I'm excited about.
Well, and one of the things, you can all see now Steve Edmunds has popped up. We're so excited, Steve, that you're here. And just to add to what Hardy was just saying, something we should be sure to highlight here is that Steve in 1985 was the first person in the state of California to bottle Mourvèdre as a single varietal wine labeled Mourvèdre. Really, of course, Rhone varieties had been in the state for a long time, but what we now see as a Rhone movement was only just starting to emerge. And Steve, I was hoping you could just briefly tell us about the wine that you had that convinced you that Rhone was the way to go for Edmunds St. John. You were telling me about that the other day.
Right. My wife, Cornelia St. John, who's the St. John in Edmunds St. John, and I lived for many, many years a 5-minute walk from the restaurant Chez Panisse in Berkeley. And we went over there to have supper one evening. And I had been tasting more and more things that were suggesting that it was Rhone varieties that I really wanted to work with. And we were tasting and also reading things, and it was sort of like suddenly the universe started noticing what I was doing and decided to give me a little nudge. So I was reading things about Syrah, about whole cluster fermentation, and tasting, wines that I got from Kermit store in Berkeley that were from producers making beautiful, beautiful wines from the Southern Rhone. And I was telling Cornelia this while we were waiting for a table, and they finally called us to our table, and we went upstairs and sat down, and they gave us the menu and the wine list, and there was a Syrah from Cupé, from Bob Lindquist, from 1982, I believe.
Yeah.
On there. It was either 82 or 83. And I had never heard of Cupé, but I thought, well, this is Chez Panisse. They know what they're doing. They've got a good wine list. So we ordered a bottle, and they brought it to the table, and I took one sniff, and I just thought, oh yeah, this is really going to work. And that was it. I mean, that just was all I needed to take that plunge.
Well, and I love that story just because we had Bob Lindquist on as a special guest last week. In 1982, Syrah was, of course, the first wine he ever made commercially for Cupé. And so I just love the dovetailing of these stories. But I know, we're looking at your Shake Ridge Ranch wine, and I'd love for you to tell us how it is you focused in on Shake Ridge as an option.
I had been making a wine that was a blend of Grenache, Mourvèdre, and Syrah for many years, called Rocks and Gravel. And for the last 7 of those years that I made that wine, I had been working with biodynamically farmed fruit from the Unti vineyard in Dry Creek Valley in Healdsburg. And in the spring of 2016, I got a call from George Unti saying that they were no longer going to be selling their grapes because they were going to be using them all themselves. And I, was sad about that because I really loved working with those grapes, and I thought that they made really wonderful wine. And I thought, I've been here before. I've lost fruit sources numerous times for various different reasons. And I just thought, well, maybe this is just an opportunity to do something that I've been thinking about. And I really heard of Shake Ridge through Hardy. I had a phone conversation with him some years back, and I don't even remember what it was about. But at that time, Hardy, I think you said you were doing an internship up there or something. And then I saw some kind of, I guess it was a big article about Shake Ridge and all the different producers and the wines that were up there. And it was an impressive enough group of winemakers. And I just thought, there must be something really good happening up there. So when I lost the access to the grapes from Unti, I just immediately thought, well, why don't I give Anne a call? And it took, one visit to know that this was a place that I would just love to be able to work with. Anne is one of my favorite people in the world. She's amazing. And so she asked me, if you could have anything you want from Shake Ridge in the way of, grapes to work with, what would you want? And going back to Bob Lindquist and actually to Louisa, his wife, I had tasted a Tempranillo from the Edna Valley, which of course is a really different place than the Sierra Nevada foothills. But
in her Verdad brand, Verdad winery.
Yeah. And I thought, man, this is a grape variety I would really love to mess around with because I never made anything from Tempranillo before. And I discovered very quickly working with it at Shake Ridge that it's a really different grape in that particular spot than it would be down in Edna Valley, both for reasons of soil and climate.
Yes.
But she also had Graciano for anyone who was working with Tempranillo, and I thought, well, that's cool. Now I could add 2 grapes to my repertoire. And of course, Mourvèdre and Grenache that I had, both of which I had worked with for many, many years. And my approach was that, you know, the wines from Rioja, which I think are maybe the most interesting wines made with Tempranillo anywhere, are blends, and Tempranillo is a big part of it, but it's not certainly the whole story.
Right.
And of course, you know, not having ever worked with Anne's grapes, I really didn't know quite what to expect. So what I said to her was, how about you know, like a ton each of Tempranillo, Grenache, Mourvedre, and a half ton of Graciano. So that's kind of where we started in 2016. In 2017, I immediately wanted to really drop the amount of the Tempranillo because it's so basy and so tannic, and bring forward the prettier elements that would be contributed by Grenache and Mourvedre, and especially to increase the Graciano, because that's a really amazing grape. What's in the 18, which we're tasting this morning, it's 31% Mourvedre, 28 Grenache, I hope I got these numbers right, 26 Graciano, and 15 Tempranillo. Did I get that right?
Yeah, 19 is
19.
the notes we have. Yeah.
Oh, 22 and 19, okay.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that is kind of implicit in what we're talking about right now, I think is an important, it's an important point to make about California. In my mind, both of you represent this spirit that's so present in California of just the room for innovation and the room for trying things. You know, the story you were just telling, Steve, you came up with an idea because you were curious, and there were good people behind it that made you believe it was possible, and so you just decided to try it. You know, it's such a testament, I think, to what's possible here. And Hardy, I know you and I have spoken about that too, that California has that room for trying things, you know.
That, I think, is the magic of California, is that it really true comes down to that. Like, I mean, I think I put in a post last night, like something about like, keep on rocking in the free world. Like, we have no rules when it comes to what we can do. And because of that, we do have that ability to explore. We do have self-imposed rules based on economy. So regardless of quality, a bottle of quality Pinot Noir is always going to sell higher than a quality bottle of Mourvedre, just based on what people can get for it. But I think if you've got that ability, like Steve had, 25 years ago, like we started in 2010, and you can find things that make sense, there is nothing holding us back. And I think that was the real beauty of when we started DNR. I mean, with just kind of a dumb idea at the time, like people thought it was ridiculous to make this lighter, fresher style of Mourvedre and focus a winery on it. But we could do that with starting with 2 barrels of wine and actually create a movement that wasn't there before. So we've got the ability to cut our own path. We've got the ability to explore. And California is such a huge, diverse state. So when you think of it in terms of like the scale of like Europe, I mean, California is multiple countries put together. And we do have that ability to like keep digging and finding stuff. And for younger producers coming up, we know that there's so much land and so much untapped and unexplored. And people have responded, not just in the US, but around the world. So it's, I can't think of a spot that's more exciting right now to do things, because everything is open and everything is possible.
One of the things I love about the pairing of the two of you here today too is, Steve has really been a mentor and inspiration for you, Hardy. But then, Steve, speaking with you, you've talked about how Hardy helped you, consider a new vineyard to try, and also has sort of reinvigorated your view of your own wine in some ways. Like you had some really funny stories that you told me the other day about how there were blind tastings and going through all these different wines, you hit one, you were certain it was your own, and then when the wines were revealed later, it turned out to be Hardy's, which I just, I love the connections there. But the truth is that, Hardy, what you've done too, has served as an inspiration to newer winemakers as well. There's a number of producers I talk to, you're coming into your 11th vintage now, and there's a number of producers I talk to, and they've been willing to try something that they'd never seen anyone do before because they've seen you do that and pull that off, you know. So we're almost out of time here, but I want to just sort of close by, you know, Hardy, we've got Steve here, and you two, of course, know each other already. But if you could ask Steve anything, what is it you'd want to ask him now?
Wow, this is such a big one, because it's like, do we look backwards? Do we look forwards? And I think the real thing is, if you could have changed one thing at, let's say, at your 10-year mark or your 11-year mark, because that's where I am, and I look to folks like Steve for, you know, to follow, you know, direction. You know, at that decade mark, Steve, what do you do right, and what would you change?
Well, I have no idea. It seems like such a long time ago. I remember we had a kind of a big celebration when we reached the 10-year mark. I did a big party at Oliveto in Oakland, and it was a lot of fun. You know, I keep thinking about one of the things that seemed important and essential, and yet in retrospect kind of crazy. I felt like I did a lot of things really, really impulsively, and there was a point when we had some issues where things weren't going smoothly, and I wished that I had not been so impulsive. Somehow we survived, and I mean, I'm happy to say that you know, I think the wines that I've made in recent years are maybe some of the best that I've ever made. But that story, Elaine, about that tasting, I mean, it was a kind of a moment of confusion. You know, I was tasting this wine, and I wasn't sure at the time. I don't think you had laid out which wines you were going to have in which flights. And I was tasting one of the wines, and I went, wait a second, did I make this? And I really couldn't tell. I really couldn't tell.
That's a huge honor, and that's, wow. Thank you. It's
sort of like the Vulcan mind meld.
That's perfect. So I'm honestly getting choked up. I love seeing this kind of mutual appreciation, and it's an honor to me to be able to help make that, to like bring the moment together right now. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
And thank you so much to people calling in from all over the world. A number of people from Japan have dialed in the middle of the night. I saw a number of people from Poland saying hello, which is pretty incredible. And wow. We have this dogged, committed group from Canada that just like piles in and roots for everybody. So there's so many other countries represented here today too, and I'm so grateful to have this chance to just be part of bringing people together and really celebrating, you know, what's good in the world. So thank you to both of you for sharing so much today. It's great to see you both.
Thanks for having us, and thanks for everyone. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Elaine, Hardy, Steve, and thank you to all our attendees. We hope that you'll join us next week. We have Randall Graham of Bonnie Doon Vineyard in our next episode to discuss his career as an innovator and his role in building the reputation of Rhone varieties in California, and Randall's most recent vineyard project. So that'll take place on May 12th at 10 a.m. So hope to see you then, and thank you all again.
Thank you.